All right, it's 1:30. I think that's official phone time. My name is Sharon Paka. I'm from Gallaudet University. I'm here on the East Coast over in Virginia. We have two fantastic, I'm really excited about these presentations. So we are in 2B today. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded. Please mute yourself, and also you might want to shut down any extra emails or whatnot, any websites that you're running, just to save bandwidth. Also, staying off camera is probably going to be helpful for the presenters. I will monitor the chat. We will have questions at the end, and we will go ahead and get started. And we could just go in the order. So I have Michelle and then Stephanie. Okay. So
all right. Yeah, I'll get us started. So let me pull up my presentation. Okay. I'm also putting the presentation into the chat for everybody. So if you want to have access to these materials, you can definitely have that. So first of all, hello, my name is Michelle Falter, and I'm an assistant professor of English education and educational equity at North Carolina State University. I'm a former middle and high school English teacher, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Today, I am going to be talking with you all about disrupting heteronormativity and cisnormativity, which I will define for you all in case these are words that are new to you, and really talking about how we can create inclusive environments, inclusive classroom spaces for LGBTQ students. So I first want to say that I am not a member of LGBTQ community. I am a very big advocate for students, colleagues who are a part of this community. I don't want to claim that I'm an ally. I feel like only people in the community can decide if I am an ally, but I hope that through my actions, I can prove that to them. And the reason why I'm very passionate about this topic is similar to Steve's story at the beginning of this conference about his students who read Carrie Holt's novel and really talked about how those students really wish that they had read those books when they were in middle school. I have had the honor of teaching some of the most amazing students who are part of the LGBT community, some, and I hopefully won't cry, but some of which have really touched me in a lot of really important ways. One of my students I taught, Leanna, actually was murdered as for her sexuality, and it was very difficult for our school community, and it has made me even more of an advocate for this work in schools. I'm also a member of the board of Safe Schools North Carolina, which works with teachers and schools to help create safer spaces for students and teachers in North Carolina. So with that, what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of unpacking those terms with you, also some facts about LGBT texts in the classroom, and talking about some personal favorites, and then some strategies that you might want to use. I am really going to try to get this in 20 minutes. This is something that I'm bad at because I can talk as well, but I might have to skip some slides if it goes too long. But first, I just want to start with some statistics and facts that I think are important to situate why this topic is so important. And these statistics come from GLSEN, and they do a school climate survey every 2 years. And one of the things that they've learned is that most LGBTQ students do not have access to LGBT-related resources, and middle school students even have way less access than high school. But high school is not great either. It's less than 50% of students. And resources could be having access to gay straight alliances or textbooks, or even access to parts of the internet. It might be blocked when you type in LGBT into it. So this is a problem. Also, if they are given a curriculum, I just want you to note that that they might be taught about it, but it might be in a negative way. So not promoting inclusivity, but a lot of them haven't had any representation in their curriculum. There has been some upward movement since 2000 of getting more resources, although it is kind of stagnating. And if you look at the very bottom one, bottom here, you see that we have positive, inclusive resources and issues, and also textbooks. That's fairly low here. We need to do better for our students, and this is why I want to talk with y'all today. So those two terms that are part of my title, I just want to spend just a minute just to talk about what they are and why we should disrupt it. So heteronormativity is really the practices, collection of practices and institutions that legitimize and privilege heterosexuality and heterosexual relationships as fundamental and natural within our society. And this idea of heteronormativity is very prevalent in our schools, and classrooms often enforce heteronormative beliefs through policing of people's sexuality and gender roles. And often we see this in inclusion or exclusion of certain topics or characters. For example, why do we teach this, the story of Romeo and Juliet, but we're also not teaching the equally beautiful story of Brokeback Mountain? If you haven't seen the movie, you should definitely watch it. It is a Romeo and Juliet kind of story. Also, there's a lot of heteronormative language that is happening in classrooms. I've heard this a lot more recently for some reason, but the words "no homo" is often used preemptively by male teens to say, "Oh, I'm not gay. Just want to let you know, I love you, bro, but no homo." They might say something like that. Or as a teacher, you might say, what does your mom and dad think, rather than using more inclusive language like guardians and parents, and not assuming that there's heterosexual parent relationships. And also that boys and girls are, dating the opposite sex. I think there are a lot of assumptions that teachers make about those things. And then cisnormativity is the assumed expectation that your gender identity and expression corresponds to your anatomical sex. And again, this is a deeply ingrained belief in our society, and schools also enforce and perpetuate these harmful binaries by policing clothing, physical appearance that don't match someone's perceived sex. So maybe not allowing boys to have long hair, not allowing girls to, I don't know, wear certain kinds of clothing or something. I often see, for example, transgender identities, being excluded. And we see this a lot with bathroom policies, where only boys are allowed to go to boy bathrooms, girls are only allowed to go to girl bathrooms, and not having gender neutral places. And I think we need to be mindful of these gender inclusive languages, making sure to use pronouns that students want to be called by, and using things like y'all. Living in the South, that's such a great neutral term, rather than boys and girls, or just saying students or scholars. We don't need to assume that that is the way that people want to identify in those binary ways. So, why are teachers so resistant to this? We know that it's important, but why might people be resistant? Well, Dr. Amanda Hartling-Tyne studied this and learned that there were a few reasons, which you could probably guess, as to why people have some resistance. So some people say that they would do it, but they just don't think it's an English teacher's job. Like maybe it belongs in a health class or something like that. I would say if you don't do it, you can't expect that other people are going to do it either. Some people just say, I would do it, but people are going to protest or get mad at me about doing this. Or they might say that they're scared to because they don't know what might happen. Or they might say, I can't do it because there's a policy in my school that says I can't. And I feel like as a teacher, those are things that you can actively take a stance on and try to change policies or have more open conversations about why it's important. Some people believe that it will do more harm than good, which is an interesting argument for not doing it, where they say that if I do this, we'll open up the possibility of students being more bullied, which is such an interesting argument. Or that talking about LGBTQ topics or literature is not fair to people who aren't, which is also a strange kind of argument to me, because we talk about a lot of things that I'm not, so that's an odd one for me. And this is the last one, I think, is a reasonable reason, but you can do something about this. I would talk about it, but I don't know how. And asking questions and coming to sessions like this is a really good start to trying to figure out how to best do this in your classroom. So I want to talk about some recommendations that I have for text, but before I do, I want to pull up this picture here and just take note that, did you know that these widely taught canonical authors are part of the LGBT community? And if you did know at least some of it, how many of you address that in your class? I think a lot of times we read someone like Langston Hughes and we focus on the fact that he is this Black man and his Black experience in New York, and think about dreams deferred. And we only talk about it in relation to his race. But knowing that he was also a gay man, how does that complicate our understandings of his poems? And I think oftentimes by not talking about this in our classroom, we are adding to queer erasure. We're erasing this part of their identity. We wouldn't read, Langston Hughes without talking about the fact that he's Black. It's so, important to what he's talking about. So we also need to talk about this other aspect of their identities and how that might impact how we are thinking about reading their pieces of literature. So how do you go about finding fabulous LGBT books? Well, there's a few things that you should consider. One, you should always look at the author. And if I know Own Voices right now is up for debate, and I don't have time to go into that right now, but I can talk about it later if you want. But is the author somebody who is part of the LGBTQ community? And if they're not, then really trying to figure out what is the motivation for writing it. Sometimes people have good intentions, but we know good intentions don't always lead to good stories or outcomes. So you want to be careful about that. You also want to look at, how recent the books have been released, because there may be some outdated ideas. The concepts and the ways in which we think about the LGBT community is constantly being renegotiated and rethought about. Also, try to avoid books that have tropes and stereotypes. I think that's something that you really want to avoid. And some of the older texts do that, and that's part of why we kind of want to pay attention to those things. And then also, don't let one book speak for LGBT experiences. Have a lot of choice in your classroom. Let your students kind of pick and choose, but also please, I beg you, do not label books with a little rainbow sticker on them, because that could do more damage. It's a story. That's all it is. And it just so happens to be that the characters are have different gender identities or sexuality in the book. We don't need to put a big sticker on it. And then also just really thinking about why, you know, are you teaching the book? What is the value of this? What are you hoping to achieve? And really thinking about what your intentions are and what biases you may be bringing to it, and making sure that you're accounting for those as you talk about it. So where can you find some really good resources? I will give you another document that gives you some more resources at the end of this presentation, but these are some places that you can go. One thing that a lot of people don't know about is Hope in a Box, which is an amazing organization that actually gives educators free LGBT books for their classroom. You have to apply for it, and I think it only happens like once or twice a year where you can sign up for it. But I mean, it's awesome. It's free books. But all of these other ones are great places to look for really good LGBTQ books. So some of my personal recommendations are these books. So I have 8 books I want to share with you. Some you may know, some you may not know. Drama is a graphic novel that's definitely very appropriate for middle grades. When I say appropriate, what I mean is that the age level of the characters is aligned with students in middle school. And this book, what I like about it is that for somebody who's starting off with wanting to incorporate LGBT topics, it does it in a way that it's not the main focus of the story, and so it's a slow start into it. Some of these possible gateways into the text is that, one, it's very accessible for students, and it's a very, you know, easy introduction for your class. This next one is one you may not be familiar with. The Legend of Korra series is based actually as a continuation of a cartoon, Avatar: The Last Airbender. And what I love about these graphic novels is that they have queer persons of color as a protagonist. It also shows bisexual representation and women loving women relationships, which that's actually a new term that I learned from my students of how you describe lesbian relationships. So I'm constantly learning what is the best language. It's always changing. And I love that, you know, the fact that it's that students might already be familiar with the television show, that this could be a really great way to continue those conversations. The next book is one I adore. If I was still in a classroom, I would be teaching this book hands down. Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World is just this beautiful story of this 12-year-old who develops feelings for another girl, but she's like grappling with it at the same time of like dealing with her family being displaced due to a tornado. And she writes this letter that's so beautiful. And I think students could really write their own letters to the world. It's also a bit of a mystery, which I don't want to give away, but it also talks about why art and writing are so helpful for healing. Let's see. This one is a pretty recent one. It won a National Book Award, which is a big deal for an author, but everything by this author, I will say, is amazing. If you don't know Kason Callender's work, definitely put this on your list. This book deals with not just homophobia, but it also deals with racism and loss. It deals with the death of King is the main character, his brother. There's so many things you can do. The figurative language of this text is just so beautiful. And I think the in for students is that it's really getting at this idea of peer pressure and gossip and like doing what's right, even if it's a hard thing to do. And I think those are such universal themes. Ramona Blue is another book I really love. And what's interesting about this book is that the main character is a lesbian girl, but through the course of the book, she starts actually questioning whether or not she is lesbian. She's always thought she was. And so it shows a character whose sexuality is fluid. And it makes you kind of think about, you know, what do we understand is like, you know, are we set? Are we always set in our sexuality? So And it also has some really interesting ties to Hurricane Katrina as well. So historically, this
Michelle,
book,
2 minutes.
yeah, I'm good. I know where I am. So this book is also really beautiful. It shows a character who is non-binary. And what often happens in trans communities, sadly, is that their families aren't always accepting of them. And it shows a story of a non-binary character who's thrown out on the street. And really, it's a book about forgiveness and like, who is your family and how do you know who your family is? Is it really your, biological family or not? And then I have to say, give a shout out to David Levithan. If you don't know his works, again, he's like the person who's gone back a long time. But this book in particular, I love that it kind of subverts the common trope of like boy meets girl, and everything is flipped on its edge, like upside down. It's an LGBT friendly town. Everybody is just like, whatever goes. And the main characters are just so interesting that you just can't help but love this story. And then the last book is Cinderella is Dead, and it features a Black queer female lead, and it includes a lot of queer representation in the supporting characters, and it really pushes back on heteronormative and misogynistic societal views around what does it mean to like find your, forever love. And it's a good fairy tale retelling. So I'm going to skip ahead. You can see other things in my presentation, but those are some things I just wanted to share with y'all, and happy to talk more, but thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, and I'm going to put in the resource document in the chat as well, along with the slides one more time. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to drop my presentation here really quickly, just so you guys can pull it up if you would like to do that rather than watch my screen. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen so I can present my Google slide deck. It's being really funky. One second. Okay. All right, hello, I'm Stephanie Branson. I work for a school district in Lewisville ISD in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. I currently serve a really abnormal role in education. I left the classroom a little bit ago and took a district central position called a learning facilitator, which really is kind of a mix of a bunch of different hats that you would traditionally see at a district office. So I am an instructional coach for a lot of new teachers, new to ELA, middle school and high schools. I am a curriculum developer for my district. There are 3 of us. I am a professional development presenter for ELA. So a lot of the district vision for ELA in our school district comes from me and my team of 3. And I really work with teachers to lesson plan, to produce units of study, to be their counselor, to be their friend, to be an ear to listen on. I'm in classrooms all the time, but I just have this weird job that places me in really different places, and each one of my days doesn't look the same. I am sharing with you guys today an abridged workshop that we do in professional learning with our new hires to LISD and our brand new teachers and our alt-cert teachers. And this workshop really revolves around poetry and amplifying our voices, using poetry and crafting poems, and really bringing the art back into English language arts. I know in my area, especially in Texas and Dallas, we have such a hold on nonfiction, informational, argumentative structures of writing because we see that as the most relevant, the most applicable, for our kids to be, as our district likes to say, college and future ready. But we really want to make sure that we're putting art in the front line. So poetry, narrative, because these means of communication are so important to tell our stories, to align ourselves with others, and to really have real connections across the world. So one of the things that I really thought of when I was putting this presentation together was the quote from The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, where she writes, "I am practicing the poems in my dreams, and the more I write, the braver I become." And I think that's so true for all of us in our world. And the more we write, the more we are able to amplify our voices and, share our joy and our truths and really be brave and to enact change through our words. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take a minute and just acknowledge the land that I'm presenting on in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. I'd like to open the session today by acknowledging that the land from which I present is the occupied, unceded, and seized territory of the Wichita and Caddo-affected tribes. These tribes have stewarded this land throughout generations, and we would like to pay our respects to elders, both past and present. So one of the things that was really cool this year for me, for my school district, for my team, was that we've been pushing, like, we need to write poetry, we need to write poetry, we need to write poetry for about 4 years now. And it falls sometimes on deaf ears. But this year we were so excited to see this national, international public broadcasting of the beauty of this, mode of communication. And I know all of us have a love for YA Lit, English, teaching. So we all know the effect that Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb poem really had on all of us. She wrote in that poem, "There is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it." The big more tears are coming. It was just so special and so powerful, and such a good communication for our students to hear, our kids, our youth, that we have voices that are brave, and we can tell our joy, and we can enact change, and we can, cultivate students and share their voices, that they can disrupt oppression and change the society and be, better than we are right now. So through that, thank you. We have a little workshop that we share with our new teachers, and we base a lot of this learning around the mentor text framework from Rebecca Odell and Allison Marchetti's really fantastic book, Writing with Mentors. If you haven't read this book, it changed writing instruction for me. It became really my writing instruction philosophy, and it's one of the really pillars that we're pushing in our school district. The mentor text framework does rely a lot on this use of imitation and taking things from writers that really inspire something within us, really makes us want to think about and add and enhance our writing by taking something from the masters. And I think William Zinsner writes this best, where he says, "Never hesitate to imitate another writer. Imitation is part of the creative process for anyone learning an art or a craft. Bach and Picasso didn't spring full-blown as Bach or Picasso. They needed models. This is especially true of writing." And I think it is so critical for really all of our youth, but especially our 6th through 12 kiddos that we're serving in public schools, to see that we don't become writers by just putting our pen or our fingers to a keyboard. We become writers by looking at art and taking in those moves and practicing those ourselves, so we can take little pieces from the masters and become our own person. And so through this, the mentor text framework, Marchetti and Odell really have 4 specific steps that they take to cultivate this kind of writing within their students. So that first step is reading a text as a reader. So they take a moment to read a text aloud, play an audio, maybe it's partial aloud, maybe they read the whole thing, and they really have students take a moment to stop and appreciate the words and listen to what the author is saying in their message, and really kind of act in a response to that. What am I connecting with? What do I see myself in? What really stands out to me? And they're just reading that through the lens of a true reader. And in that second step, Marchetti and Odell really want us to focus on reading this text as a writer. So now that we've really taken in this text and enjoyed it and acknowledged it and really honored the author's initial purpose, we're going to look at this as writers, and we're going to notice the craft moves, how the author is conveying their message, what the author specifically did that was interesting to allow the readers to get to their point or to illuminate something new, and really to notice just what moves that author made when they composed that text that we might not have seen before. And then once Marchetti and Odell kind of have them play with looking at the actual text itself, we really want to open up this writing experience for students to craft and play on their own. So they're going to imitate, they're going to mimic, they're going to play with writing. It might be just the topic that inspires something within them. It might be a beautiful piece of language that the students are like, I really want to take that and make that my own, but I want to talk about this instead. And really just using this work from the master to be able to improve myself and enhance my writing as a teen or developing writer. I know I use this process on my own too when I'm looking at interesting text. So it's not just something we see within the classroom. And then finally, the last step is for students to reflect upon the writing process, on their own, and how this made me a better writer, what moves did I make that I wouldn't have normally, and then really to take some agency and have kiddos be brave and express themselves and share something that they wrote. So they might share something that they wrote, in totality, whether it's a complete poem, a little piece of narrative prose, or you might, hey, I'm not comfortable with sharing my whole piece. It's not finished. I don't even have a rough draft done or a first go, but I'm proud of this sentence I created. And I really want to read this to you guys because I think this sentence taught me something new and taught me something as a writer myself. And so really that's kind of the pedagogical approach behind the mentor text framework. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I really wanted to kind of walk you guys through an abridged version using a text that's really dear to my heart that really, I think, amplifies that really specialness that we get when we first discover ourselves as a writer. And so I'm going to invite you guys to kind of jot down some notes, jot down some writing as I take you through an amended version of this process and just enjoy how this 4-step experience cultivates something within ourselves that we might not have seen before. So I'm going to share with you the poem On Paper by Jacqueline Woodson. This is one of her not as well-known pieces of writing, but I think for kids, 6 through 12, again, this is something that really they can connect with, they can pull pieces from and craft something of their own in a really low-risk situation. So this poem is called On Paper. The first time I write my full name, Jacqueline Amanda Woodson, without anybody's help, on a clean white page in my composition notebook, I know if I wanted to, I could write anything. Letters becoming words, words gathering meaning, becoming thoughts outside my head, becoming sentences written by Jacqueline Amanda Woodson. So I just want you to take 30 seconds to think about something in this text that really stuck with you on that first read. Like, what did you notice? What is the author's message? What is really sticking out and something that you're really going to hold in your heart and take forward? If I had a lot more time, I would maybe have a share out. It's a huge group too, so I probably wouldn't do that on a Zoom platform. But breakout groups, something like that would be really fantastic. So the next step, I would take my kids, I would say to them, okay, we read this as a reader. We found some things that were really cool to us that we held in our hearts that really made us think, about something new or that we connected to or reminded, something. We were reminded of something in our past or something within ourselves. But now we're going to look at this text through the lens of a writer. So we're going to look at specific craft moves. We're going to see what the writer did really interestingly, what moves that they made that really we haven't seen before, that don't make sense, and just dig into why we think some of these decisions were made. And so here, I would reread the text again, but just for the lack of time, I'm not going to put you guys through that right now. And we would kind of just share out things that we were noticing. So some things that I notice about this poem is Jacqueline Woodson's use of italics versus regular print letters. Jacqueline's use of indentation or centering of things rather than straight down the page. And really her syntax that she's using, that she's developing her message about her name and writing, but really in an interesting way that doesn't, if we were to be in prose, make as much sense. So that whole conversation hopefully would take a couple of minutes with my kids. With something like this, it would be a shorter conversation. When we were looking at something like a Jericho Brown poem, a Clint Smith, something that has a little more length to it and maybe some more higher, more complex vocabulary, we would spend some more time talking about why did they choose this word here, what would have been different if we would have moved this line somewhere else, and really kind of dove into the structure and the choices that the author made. And so this is where I'm going to invite you to kind of do some writing of your own. So we're going to do our step 3, which is crafting our poem. And I want you guys to just take a moment, and I know we're in conference land, so it's a lot of sit and get and listening and hearing amazing presentations, but I want you guys to take a minute and a half to start crafting something of your own, to take a moment to go within yourselves and do some writing. Something that inspires you with this poem. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to move us on, but I really invite you to continue your writing later tonight. If you have a quiet moment, if there's something you really want to go back to and revisit and build our writing life as adults, I think that's really important and a practice we should always have. But with 2 minutes about left, I wanted to just share a couple of mentor poems that I've used with both adults and students to write about joy and to write about change making and resilience. And a couple of those are obviously the big one from this year, The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. To me, this is something that was very transformative in my practice, and we've done this with some of our 8th grade and 9th grade students, and it's been something that's really transformed them as student writers also. So I invite you to use this poem with your students in some way. I also have done it with adult writers as well in my district, so it's one of those poems that really works for all, writing levels. Another one that I really hold dear to my heart is There's a Lake Here by Clint Smith. It's from his Counting Descent collection. And this one, it just doesn't, you don't expect it to go where it goes. And it just makes you feel so full of joy and love, and your heart feels warm. And with so much literature that is focused on just social justice and, you know, racial literacy and culturally responsive narratives and prose and text. It's nice to kind of turn the head on that quarter to be this kind of beautiful piece that Clint writes himself. Another one that I think is really beautiful and one that I don't see used very often is Allison Hedge Koch's America, I Seen You Back. This is a great paired piece for a lot of the nationalism texts that we have in our required textbooks. I know Texas, we do have more of that than maybe other states do. So I like to pair this with a lot of those pieces as well to kind of give it that second voice and that other side. And it's really beautifully written and really has a great just message that we don't usually see, especially someone who is an Indigenous writer. And so I know my time is about up, so I'm going to stop rambling. But again, I thank you guys for listening to me and kind of dealing with this very abridged workshop that we do that usually takes an hour or more. But it's something that works really well with our new hires, our students. We always open our curriculum development sessions by doing one of these together as adult writers, and it really kind of grounds our heads and our practices and affirms what we believe in moving forward with practice. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much.
This was fantastic. I see some sharing actually in the chat. There's also some shared links. I made some notes because I knew that would be hard to kind of go back, but I want to point out to Michelle during your presentation, which was phenomenal. Thank you so much for that. Jen Sanders shared a great video on pronouns. So if you're interested, kind of scroll back up there. There's a link to a YouTube video. And I'm not seeing any questions, but I made some notes. Like one of the questions I had is about LGBTQ authors and how do we reference? So I actually, like, I'm a literature professor and I teach adolescent literature, but I also have this weird public history thing going on. And I'm writing a book on women writers buried in Virginia cemeteries. But I think I found a writer that for several times she identified as a male. So I feel uncomfortable saying she, but she would have only used she at the time period. So how do we recognize that without knowing? Is that something you could answer, Michelle?
That's a tough one, because if they're not alive, then we can't really ask them what they would like to be called. I think my personal answer would be that we should use language that we know now. So, because I think if somebody were reading it and you used she, it might show to other people an outdated notion of sexuality. So I think I would move towards using the most current understanding of how people would. But like I said, I don't have a really good answer for that. Yeah. I think that's a really tricky situation, because ideally you do want to ask someone what they would like to be.
It's hard not to know. And I just sort of think that even the beginning in your discussion about the language arts teachers not feeling like we're responsible, we're the language people. Yeah. So, we should be bringing those Victorians in that used they for singular pronouns. That's our job. Yeah. And I'm always like, we should just call everybody they. It's easier as default, but I know that's great.
Yeah. I like Joanne's had a suggestion in the chat of kind of having an author's note to just kind of explain your rationale behind it. I think that is probably the best to do.
That's kind of what I'm doing so far, is that this individual lived using a male name at certain periods of time. So I'm not seeing other questions, but Stephanie, I just also want to say too, thank you so much. That was amazing. And I actually did start to write. And then I was like, wait, I've got to be the timekeeper. So there's some, there's some pressure there. But one of the things when you talked about, when I teach adolescent literature, I use Who Killed Mr. Chippendale, a mystery in poems by Mel Glenn, and that's 1999. My students love it.
Yeah.
But it also helps them write from the point of view of a character. So if they have that sort of uncomfortable, I'm not willing to share my work, well, they're putting it on a character. So I think that because we write like sort of our own mystery at the end of class. So how do you approach that when students are hesitant, but you know they have something there?
Yeah, so one of the things that I really like to, when I go in and model this with teachers, and especially you see with younger boys that, oh, I don't have anything to write about. I like football. This is not about football, or you know, those things that our dear kids love to kind of pull for us to kind of not write and not get into what they see as feelings. But one of the really beautiful things about this structure is that it allows teachers to go in and meet with a kid and be like, hey, like we're mimicking writing. What happens if you take something that you're really passionate about and that you start to play with the language by just substituting words? And what happens to your writing when you're substituting words and rewriting that out? And how are you noticing things that you're changing along the way? And I think for me, that's usually my entry point with our student learners. And even I see that when I run this protocol with adults, it works kind of in a similar way if they're not used to writing something that is a true literary text. Like I said, literary text is kind of not at the forefront of a lot of our given curriculums. And that's something we're trying to change at our district. And I think poetry for me is one of my absolute most favorite ways to start, because it does seem a lot more low stakes than saying, we're going to dive into some fiction prose. Let's do that right now.
Yeah, that's great. And when I teach an introduction to lit course, if we're face-to-face, I actually have them act out. Like I teach at Gallaudet University, so we're, American Sign Language all the way. So I have them act out Billy Collins' Introduction to Poetry. So if you know that poem, it's, basically, kind of interrogating the poem and putting him in a chair and putting a spotlight. And so it's a lot of fun and it gets you sort of out of your comfort zone. So we have about 3 more minutes. So there's one question, Stephanie. Whoa, hold on. Stephanie, have you seen the teachers applying this protocol in their own classrooms? And how has that gone? What additional supports do you offer?
Yeah, so we've been kind of putting this protocol into classrooms with our teachers. We're going to be kind of bridging on our 3rd year of this being a best practice that we're really pushing. And so I've been invited to do a lot of teacher observations on this protocol with kiddos. I see it most often done in the 6 through 10 classrooms. And things that I see with this is we have to be really intentional about the poem we're putting in front of kids. If we're putting something that's very abstract, very verbose, we see kids back away from that more. And that seems a lot more scary than putting something like On Paper or 100% Gamer or Hope is a Thing with Feathers, something that we can really connect to. And it's short enough to be low risk that we can really draw our own ideas and put them into that poem's style or structure a little bit easier. But some other supports that we offer for this is we actually have a big training that we do where we have a classroom poster that we give out that we designed, and we have a whole collection of mentor texts that we're constantly updating that we also push out to teachers that either we've done with teachers at conferences or professional learnings or curriculum writing, or ones that I've gone in and done with classrooms also. So those are kind of the things that we're using right now as supports, but we're constantly trying to fix that and add that on.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to read this quickly. This is for Michelle. Have your pre-service teachers now in service reported backstories of incorporating LGBTQ plus lit?
So I work in North Carolina. So I start there, and if you know anything about North Carolina, there's like a lot of other states, there's a lot of oppressive policies and things like that. But I will say, yes, but not all. And I'm seeing that the ones that are doing it are more incorporating it as literature circle choices, and or obviously as independent reading books on their bookshelves. They're more comfortable with that. I am still waiting for more of them to be comfortable reading it as a whole class novel. I have not seen that yet, although I just taught a student this last year who is non-binary, and they will be incorporating because it is a part of their identity, and really, you know, feel passionate about inclusive literature in the classroom. So I'm excited to see what they do in the next couple of years as a teacher. But yeah, it's slow, and not everyone. I also teach a lot of very Southern Christian students who this topic is kind of sometimes their first, you know, time to really delve into it and to kind of explore their own biases about it. So I move the needle, but I want to move it more.
So we have one last question, but we are out of time. So I want to just read the question, and maybe we can all think about it, and everybody can follow up. Even at the kind of cocktail hour chat later. Do you have suggestions for when you teach on a team and you're the only person who is comfortable teaching LGBTQ literature? I think that's a fantastic question. So I think that we do have to close the session now so that everyone can have time to take a break. Thank you all for great presentations. Thanks everyone for coming. This was a great turnout.
And Stephanie, I'm happy to chat more with you. Just feel free to reach out, okay?
Yeah, awesome.